Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon,
Hi.
everybody. Thank you, guys. Welcome, Maya. We're going to talk today about future-proofing your startup. And before I introduce Maya, we've had conversations over the last 2 days about world class from India, right? I mean, the theme has changed over the last several years about productivity and cost and value, and now we're getting ready to sort of rule the world in terms of building products and services to deliver to global customers. While we do that, a couple of things have happened over the last 2 years. The pandemic has certainly changed quite a few things, and our aspirations to reach out to the globe have certainly grown much larger. And how do we learn from that, future proof our organizations, startup or larger, is a conversation and insights we'd love to get from Maya. Maya is a global, tech leader. She's been on both sides of the fence, been parts of large brands, large organizations, and also done started. Right now, our independent board member in a variety of organizations from insurance to education. So, welcome, Maya. It's my pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and what a good backdrop of an amazing year for Indian technology to be having this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maya. Welcome. Maya, let's jump in directly, right? I mean, the conversations over the last 2 days have been we've had phenomenal successes, where companies like Freshworks, getting into IPO. We've had several leaders talk about how our dreams are far bigger, far wider, if you will, right? Tell us a little bit about your journey. I mean, you've seen organizations, even though they were large organizations, you've seen them in Asian markets and global markets going from small to large and scaling and hyperscaling. Would love to get your thoughts about your journey on hyperscaling these brands and organizations.
Yeah, I have to tell you, having been a founder in e-commerce maybe 13 years ago, timed maybe slightly before the e-commerce boom in some ways, and then actually going on to be an entrepreneurial leader in large organizations, you see things quite differently, but you also see things quite similarly in some ways. That's the irony of it. Having seen companies like Google or Twitter really go from its very early stages of globalization to transforming themselves into a very mature sets of global footprint, it's been interesting that hyperscaling, hypergrowth has been a part of that equation for me throughout in that experience. So whether it's a small startup or it is a larger organization, you are multitasking and thinking about today and thinking about the needs of tomorrow parallelly, whether that is sort of trying to perfect the product market fit while also thinking about the capacity and building people and teams at the same time, and managing the complexity of that, thinking about which markets you want to go start next, and how do you do that without diluting the focus of the market you're in today. So I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of finding these two gears of operation, having your eye on today and having your eye on tomorrow parallelly, and then finding the best of your multitasking capabilities as an organization to manage through that scaling process.
Awesome. So you brought up two, 3 points. One is teams and talent. We'll certainly get to that. No conversation today can end without that. But
Absolutely.
you brought up something about doing things in parallel, focusing on your current and looking ahead. Um, Tell us a little bit about how you've seen, maybe examples of companies which have done this either well or not so well, and learn from that, which is they've been probably successful in their quote unquote home markets and either tried to venture out or have been successful across. Because the reason I ask is many of the startup founders or even the mid stage companies today who've reached a certain point in their revenue and in their maturity in the organization, I'm thinking, should I just go deeper and deeper into the current market or expand my footprint in a couple of other markets? How would you frame this conversation for some of the founders?
Yeah, I think the question's amazing, and there are two ways to think about it. One is I've seen companies around the world, and I'll share some really good stories around this. I've seen companies around the world wait to get to a point where you've mastered your domestic market, especially where domestic market already has incredible amounts of scale. India is definitely one such market, and you sort of feel like now you're ready to find that next lever of growth, and you start to say, hey, I've mastered this market. I've had my learnings around how to get good product market fit. Now let me go and think about what's next, right? A great example of companies who've done that in and around Southeast Asia. There's a US listed company called a C, which has an e-commerce offering, Shopee. Shopee started with markets very close to home, Singapore, Southeast Asia, and then sort of set its eyes on Latin America, said, hey, the market dynamics of Latin America, so close to what Southeast Asia feels like and operates like in terms of technology maturity or payments maturity. So this is the time to go tackle that next market. You see other companies that are, China is a great example of a market which also has a big domestic market. We saw TikTok sort of really, ByteDance, the parent company, really with Toutiao get a deep footing into the domestic market, get its AI models and its core product right there, and then started to look at other markets like the Japan, Korea belt, the Southeast Asia belt, and then the US and UK. Then you have some companies, an alternate model to consider is, if you're earlier in the cycle and you have a product that could actually work fundamentally as a platform that's cross-market, then you sort of think global from day one and global from within, right? And some examples of that, if you take Canva or you take Linktree in Australia, fundamentally product offering that cuts across a certain segment's user needs, whether that was design needs of consumers or less sophisticated designers around the world, or you think about creators for Linktree around the world. And from day one, your business and your audience is essentially global. As long as you have a payment option available across countries, which is relatively easy these days, you have that opportunity. I look around and I see a lot of interesting similarities to that, to NFT platforms. And you have very interesting talent in India that can actually transcend and be able to offer these types of services. So I think you have that choice to make. Are you a country by country business fundamentally, where you need to build supply demand, you need to build consumer insights, in which case, get one right and then go to the next, versus, you might also have opportunities to build global by default. And I don't think you should shy away from that at this stage.
Interesting points, right? I mean, you go global by default or build a tech, and you brought up NFT and you brought up consumer. Let me just segment the markets a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If we take some of our B2B SaaS examples, right? A typical guidance, any investor would give is, don't worry about the domestic market, just go global, get the US, get the Europe, get the money and get the, analysts and get your ratings, and then, worry about the other, markets, right? It's an approach, seems to have worked reasonably well for many SaaS founders. I'm part of an organization, which clearly is serving the US and European markets at a 60-70% ratio as compared to the domestic markets. But I think the examples you've given clearly are in the space where it's either focused at consumer or consumer tech, right? Or which is powering the consumer environment. Tell me a little bit more about the tech aspect and the data aspect and the insights aspect, right? As you build a potentially global consumer brand or power a global consumer brand.
I think the big differentiator, if you will, between getting a consumer offering right in market is really understanding consumer need. And consumer need fundamentally has so many more vectors of influence, like culture or preference or taste. And so there's a lot more nuance in consumer need in some ways, and therefore sometimes harder to draw a similar line across different users around the world without localization. And so here you start to really think about, and commerce is a vertical that's an interesting example. You start to see that you need enough local supply, you need enough local demand, but really what mirrors that, matches that, is phenomenal data science or machine learning to be able to say, hey, in these cohorts, I can identify you, I can serve you the right recommended products. And if you like this, I know you're going to like that. And I think that is deep into understanding cohorts and thinking about that. And a country could be thought about as a master cohort, if you will. And but once you have built for a scaled market like India, if you have built for domestic demand, you have the ability and the technology and the know-how to be able to take that and scale it, right? You'll be applying it to a different canvas. You'll have to think through things like UI and preferences of payments or logistics that might be local to a market. But I think that's sort of where you have to really dig down and know very well what your strengths and superpowers as a business are, right? I look at Shein, right? Now global commerce giant, but started as a Chinese brand. And you start to see what they knew they were good at. They were really good at cross-border logistics. And they built e-commerce business. You could have never imagined that a Chinese company would be the global fast fashion leader a few years ago, right? But you started to see that they understood that they could do cross-border logistics the fastest across countries. They can localize everything else. And I think, and I'm oversimplifying it, but that's sort of the principles that I think, I would love to see founders in India do, which is really get to know what is your superpower, what can be localized, and then what is something that you have a real deep moat around, and then decide which markets to go after.
Talking about moats, and you mentioned China a few times. I had the opportunity to build up teams in China over the last 2 decades. Things have changed, right? The geopolitics and the perceptions have become a pretty strong driver. Are we ready to say it's advantage India right now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Think about, we talked about the Chinese companies. I'll give you another example. I was talking to the leadership team at Tinkoff Bank, which is the largest digital bank in Russia. And they were ideating about how to go global. And some of the discussions were really at the heart of it was geopolitical approaches, right? Where will they be welcome from a brand perception versus where they won't be welcome? And here is, I look at India and you see a relatively neutral, highly democratic sort of space that you're operating in, which has fundamentally set up a lot of markets that are neutral to friendly to Indian companies and would welcome that. You've got to take every advantage you can get, right, as a founder. And
Sure.
the geopolitical reality of being an Indian company is favorable at the moment.
And it's not just, sorry to interrupt, but it's not just from being an environment to build your product or build capability centers here, but also as a consumer brand, either going from India and entering a market. So that clearly is going to be a geopolitical advantage for us, at least in the current environment. Correct?
Correct. There's a period of time when I think the ethos of a brand is associated with where the headquarters of the company is.
Yeah.
And then brands sometimes are able to successfully transcend the point of ethos and origin to saying, I'm a global brand, right?
Yeah.
But during that period of transition from, hey, you are a company that originated or is headquartered in India, building for the world, to the point where, hey, I perceive you completely as a global company, that's when that geopolitical advantage will really come to play in a positive way at this time.
Awesome. So fundamentally, that ethos has to come from actions, product, design, technology, all aspects. Now, powering all those things is teams, right? Talent, and future-proofing ourselves from getting into global markets, building that ethos, building the tech, is all going to come from teams. every boardroom conversation today is about, talent, 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 right? Remote is here to stay. Hybrid is here to stay, right? How do you see remote and hybrid? As in, how far remote? I mean, it's not just about I'm based in Bangalore and a couple of my team members are in Pune and Gurgaon. Are we? Is geography history from this perspective?
I love that. Is geography history? That should be the quote of this session, Narendra. I think that remote is very much here to stay. I think remote was making a lot of progress even before COVID. And COVID became that necessary use case to prove it out in ways out of just necessity. People were all working from home in different parts of the world. And then, people started to say, if I can work from home for this job from here, I could technically work from anywhere and you should be fine with that, right? I mean, within
Yeah.
reasons of technology delivery and things like that. And you realize that there's no turning back. We've
Mm.
proved that accountability can work, right? And you need to have the right tools, and you need to have the right inclination as a manager to get that right. But you certainly can get productivity in this world. Now, how do you make remote effective? I think this is where the in between the science and the art, this is actually a lot of combination of science and art in my mind.
Yeah.
You think about remote work, and I think about sort of asynchronous working a lot, right? And in my last job at Twitter, we really thought deeply about how to get asynchronous working right. So how do you make decisions? Do you make decisions asynchronously versus doing it live? How do you document everything in documents far more, and make sure that people have had an opportunity across time zones to weigh in on things? But if you also think about baby steps in this process, Narendra, I feel like having a block of time zones. So let's say someone
Mhm.
sitting in India, but as saying that you will look at plus or minus 2 or 3 time zones might be pragmatic as a way to start, while you
Mhm.
experiment with processes like asynchronous working and getting collaboration right, getting empowerment right in these worlds, and then sort of going from there. And I think the end state is very much work anywhere, and I see companies follow employees and their choices. No, gone are the days when you would plant an office first and then say, okay, I'm going to hire here. I think you just hire, and then you see where you get a mass of
Exactly.
employees, and you decide where your next office is going to be. So it's
Absolutely.
a complete sea change in that sense, but an exciting one. Lots to perfect for leaders around the world.
You brought up science and art in terms of just managing the productivity aspect. I'll do a shameless plug. I wrote a short LinkedIn article this morning on the science of it, right? Which we've tried to build tools and technologies at Soroco to be able to at least capture the science aspect of it so that you can do better. But that's for another day of discussion, right?
Yeah, I thought it was great article, and really interesting to put tools in the hands of leaders to say, what do you know, what do you not know, what are you not seeing, because
Yeah.
that's the reality of remote work.
Absolutely. One last thing before we sign off, right? Purpose, right? Every leader probably who's had great smiles on these meetings and over the last 2 days, and given all the gyan, etc., is going back to work and like, is my next joinee in? Is my next hiring in? And we're all, focused on getting the talent in place, right? How does enough has been spoken about purpose, but how does purpose play a role in this, and how have you seen play a role in this?
Yeah, I think purpose is a multifaceted area of conversation. I don't think companies anymore trade off purpose and profit, right?
Yeah.
But you do actually, it's valuable for the company to know what its own purpose is. The reason I say that is because when you start to think about talent, increasingly paying someone more than the next company is not going to be the differentiator for why talent will come or stay with you. But if your purpose or your company's purpose resonates deeply with their personal purpose, sometimes money may not make a difference, right? And you may have a much deeper retention tool there that makes your team feel like a sustainable team. So I think that this area is going to need a lot of deep thinking and authenticity from founders and from leaders to really put a foot forward and say, this is what the company's purpose is.
Awesome, awesome. So I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to try and at least do a crude summary, right? Authenticity of purpose, there's no compromise to that, right? You're going to have to work with teams across time zones, across locations, just, figure out a mechanism. And I think, as like you said earlier, build that ethos of being a global brand in every aspect of our business, our communications, our design, our expertise, our technology, our understanding of the culture of the markets we're getting into. And we think that the time is now world class from India. Definitely the time is now in this advantage India for a variety of reasons: talent, geopolitical, our mindsets, the push from venture capitalists. So I think great insights, Maya. What do you think? We're ready to go really world class from India?
Oh, I think you're sitting on a gold mine there. I want to bet that the next amazing consumer companies in the next decade are going to be from India. So I'd like the audience to say challenge accepted and make it so.
Awesome, awesome, great. Thank you very much, Maya. Appreciate it. Thank
Thanks,
you, guys.
Narendra.